welcome to day 5 of the 6 Ds to loving yourself well. Today, what we're going to be exploring is forgiveness. And what you're going to be learning is we're going to consider forgiveness for others, and you're going to be looking at the effects of not forgiving, and then we're going to look at the effects of forgiving, so that allows you to then to move towards loving yourself well. And then we're going to explore forgiving yourself. So let's first explore, what is forgiveness? Well, forgiveness is a conscious decision to release feelings of resentment and vengeance against another person or a group of people, and it's a decision made whether they deserve that forgiveness or not. Forgiveness is not about condoning the behaviours. It doesn't stop you from continuing to take action against the person should you need it. It doesn't mean that you agree with the behaviour that they've done. It does mean that you will be releasing anger, vengeance, resentment, frustration, and any other negative emotions that have a psychological debilitating effect by hanging on to a grudge. So when we look at the benefits of forgiveness, they are for your benefit, not for the benefit of the other person. It makes no difference to them whatsoever whether you forgive them or not. And actually, in many cases, in not forgiving them, you're feeding that energy that increases the drama and the trauma between the two of you to an extent that they can feed off it. So why would you want to do that? So in forgiving someone, and strangely in letting them go, and we will give you an exercise for letting go later as well, then it allows you to move on. It allows you to function in a way, it allows you to function with less stress, with less anxiety, with more happiness and more joyousness. And as we know, happiness and joyfulness are a key part to learning how to love yourself well. One of the benefits of forgiving others is, as we said, it does not involve not following through on court action or making a complaint or whatever else may be involved in the issue that you're involved in and feeling that you don't forgive them for. But it will allow you to approach those. So for example, you're going into a court case against your husband. If you're feeling angry and resentful and a judge sees that coming off you, he is much more likely to instinctively go against your statements, to go against what you're saying. Whereas if you can come across as reasonable, calm and clear and unstressed, I mean, obviously anyone will have anxiety going into a courtroom, but if you can then come across without the anger and the debilitating feelings against the person, it will allow you to function at a level and to access the information, because when you're feeling anger or resentment, you are in the limbic brain and you are feeling a fight or flight response. And it means that you don't have access to the higher cerebral cortex and the thinking processes that could be necessary in putting your argument forward or expressing yourself accurately and congruently. Having looked at the advantages of forgiving people, now let's consider the reasons why it can be so hard to actually forgive someone. And I have to confess, I've been there myself and thought, it's all right you saying that, but then the feelings of anger and resentment are still firmly wedged in there. So it's kind of, let's deal with that first. So what are the possible reasons that you might find it difficult to forgive somebody? Now, as I'm saying some of these, be aware that they don't all necessarily apply to you, but be open to thinking for yourself whether this does apply to you. Be kind and gentle to yourself at the same time. So it's not about, oh, I've got that wrong as well. But what I'm wanting you to do is to lovingly explore the possibilities of these being the reasons why you would not want to forgive someone. Because if you have these reasons, then I can more or less guarantee that it will stop you being able to release the negative emotions that are involved, and it will prevent you from being able to genuinely forgive them. So, first and foremost is a sense of, my sister used to call it righteous indignation, and a notion of wanting retribution and revenge. Now, that doesn't necessarily go with righteous indignation. But if you've got feelings that you want retribution and revenge, and you want to get your own back on the person who you believe has wronged you, and I do say who you believe has wronged you, because in certain cases it will be specifically that they have, but there will be other cases where it may be your beliefs that have allowed you to think that they have wronged you, and I'm thinking in cases such as road rage, that then triggers this same response. So it's about acknowledging that there is a judgment as well. When you make a decision that you need to forgive someone, you've judged them as having done a wrongdoing. Now, I'm not saying that they have, I'm not saying that they haven't. What I'm saying is you've made a judgment that they've done a wrongdoing, that there is therefore something to forgive. Okay? So retribution and revenge is one of the key ones, and one of the things that a lot of people experience, and a lot of people want to get their own back to be able to bring it into balance. It's a little bit of the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And as someone once said to me, an eye for an eye, all it does is leave two people blind. So it is not considered the most loving thing to do. And if we're looking at this programme, we're talking about how to love yourself well. Do you enjoy feeling superior? Do you enjoy feeling as though that person has been in the wrong because look at me, I'm the best one, I'm doing right? And to be quite honest, at times that could be part and parcel. When I've just mentioned road rage, it's like, I'm the best driver, I've done this right, look at you, you've done that wrong. And it's just a possibility, remember, just consider it and think about it for the situation that you're considering about forgiving the person for. It may be that you just don't know how to resolve the situation. Well, some situations don't have a resolution. Some situations, interestingly, if you do nothing, have a magical way of resolving themselves, especially if you've let go of the emotion. And what I would say is, if you're in anger and resentment and you're struggling to find a resolution, part and parcel of that difficulty is because you're still in anger and resentment. Because whilst you're in that, as I mentioned earlier, you're in the limbic brain and you can't access the higher thinking processes of the cerebral cortex up here. And it's the cerebral cortex that is your problem solver. It is the cerebral cortex that is the solution finder. So it is important to be able to access that part of your brain that will enable you to find ways to resolve the situation. And you're much more likely to be able to do that once you've released anger and resentment. Perhaps you're addicted to adrenaline that anger provides. Again, it has the effect on your body, and your body becomes used to that stimulus and that sensation, so that when you get the dip in adrenaline, you then immediately are searching for the next boost that will cause that adrenaline. This is likely to be out of your conscious awareness. So it's well worth considering, do you have a pattern of finding drama in your life that enables you to get an adrenaline boost each and every time that you create a drama around you? And if that's so, then it's something that we would look on in further in the 6 months programme. But an awareness of it to start with is always a good place, and it's amazing how once you have an awareness, an awareness with an intent to change allows your brain to then find the ways to do that. Another reason that you may find it hard to forgive is if you self-identify as a victim. Do you have a victim mentality? Is it always you that you find is the person who's getting picked on, who's the person who is who people find fault with? Are you the scapegoat within a group? Do you find yourself acting and taking on that role of victim regularly? If so, again, this is a pattern that you need to explore in further detail, and it's one that we will look at in much more detail in our 6-month programme. Are you afraid if you forgive, you will lose the connection with the other person? It may sound strange, But there are times when you may want to be linked with or speak to or have been so dependent on that other person that the very notion of them not being with you any further, when you don't connect with them, even though it's a dysfunctional connection, you still crave that connection. Now, these are all reasons that have been identified as reasons that people can find it hard and difficult to forgive. So now we're going to move on to a process whereby we'll work through how you decide to forgive the person, and then we'll consider the next actions that you may want to take. So now for an exercise to help you to actually put forgiveness into practice. Having made the decision, it's now time to help you to work through a process that will allow you to release some of those emotions. Having once released the emotion, you can then proceed to allow forgiveness for the person or the group that have upset you. Now, I'd like you to think about the incident that angered you. I'd like you to take a piece of paper and a pen, and I'd like you to write down in non-judgmental terms the incident. It's a little bit like writing a report when we used to work in healthcare, where you're writing it without any of the underlying presumptions about the person. So for example, you might say, Sharon said she didn't like what I was doing in a loud voice. Not Sharon shouted at me. So it is just to think of purely behavioural descriptions of what happened. It may take a little practice, but that's fine. Just write it down in that form. And then I'd like you to take some nice deep breaths. Breathing in through the nose, deep into the abdomen, and slowly breathing out through the mouth. And consider how you felt at the time of the incident. Now accept how you felt at that time. Accept how it made you react. Remember, the key point here is non-judgmental. So again, you wouldn't describe it as I stormed out of the room. You would just describe it as I left the room. So now link with the feelings, accept and acknowledge them, whilst taking those nice deep breaths. And as you're breathing in, you're breathing in love. And as you're breathing out, you're just allowing that feeling to evaporate. Take as long as it needs. And now, write down, what did you learn from the experience? How did it help you to grow? How could it help you to grow if you don't feel that you've grown already? What did you learn about yourself and your boundaries? And remember, if this is something really, really serious, you have survived and you can grow. Now, having fully explored your perspective of the event, it's time now to consider the other person within the incident that you're giving forgiveness for. And to look at it from, or to consider them, and at some point to look at it from their perspective. But first, look at them as a human being. Consider, we're all flawed. So look at that person as the flawed human being that they are, that they live in a world, when we've spoken earlier on in the programme about where we get our limiting beliefs from, where we get our frame of reference from, then it's about accepting that that other person has absorbed and taken on their own limiting beliefs, and recognizing that they have a skewed frame of reference within the situation that you found yourself. Now, that skewed frame of reference is in relation to your own frame of reference and your own frame of beliefs. I love the saying that comes from Byron Katie. She describes, when describing people that are doing what others would describe as evil things, she just goes, only a confused mind would do that. And I hate to say this, but I think that's a good percentage of the population that are walking around with confused minds. And we all know that we have confused minds about different things. So we may be well sorted in one area of our lives and yet experience limiting beliefs and dysfunctions in other areas. So thinking about the other person, when you were hurt, they were trying to meet some need of their own. What do you think that need could be? And why, from their perspective, do you think they did what they did? So an example of this might be a superior at work who's given you a really bad time, but then you realise that they have been pressured from above, and that it's not them, it's that they feel that pressure, and it's then stimulated them to behave in ways that are not conducive to them actually achieving the outcome that they want. So thinking about that, write down what you think their need was, write down why you think they did it from their perspective, and you don't have to agree with it, you just have to acknowledge that that is a possible reason. And now the decision is to forgive them. It's now the decision whether you tell them or whether you don't. Now, for some, it may be somebody who grieved you many years ago and you're no longer in touch with them. Or it may not be appropriate for you to go up and say, well, I can promise you that if they think that they were in the right at the time and you walk up to them and go, I forgive you for doing such and such, and they haven't actually said, I'm sorry, it could lead to another incident that you might be looking at then forgiving them for. So as you've seen, bring humour into your situation, consider what the consequences of that one could be. What I would recommend you do is write down that you forgive them and what you forgive them for, and then read it out loud as though saying it to them. You may or you may not want to use a mirror at this point, because we're going to move on to self-forgiveness, and I prefer to promote you using the mirror for when you're looking at yourself and doing the self-forgiveness techniques. So that brings us to the end of the forgiving others. There is lots more of course that we can explore, and we do so when we look into our 6-month programme of How to Love Yourself Well. But for now, that's it as far as forgiving others. Let's move on to forgiving you. And let's now have a look at self-forgiveness, or forgiveness of self. Now, I had an interesting aspect to that, because my thoughts on that were, who is the judger and who is the perpetrator when it comes to being about forgiving yourself for doing something? So it's quite interesting, even on a kind of metaphysical level, who is forgiving who when it comes to self-forgiveness. Now, one of the things that results from, if we are critical and judging ourselves, because remember, when we talk about a requirement for forgiveness, first there has to be a judgment that something has been done wrong. And I would say a good percentage of the population, or at least the people that I speak to and that I know, have very strong self-judgments, and even stronger in many ways, and are less forgiving of themselves than they are of other people. So where does this internal critic come from? Because as we talk about the person being judged and the judger, so somewhere there is a judger or a judge within your energy within your thoughts and beliefs that is, so your thoughts and your beliefs, and again we keep coming back to the thoughts, to the beliefs that we created when we were younger, that we then judge ourselves against. Now, what judgments do you make about yourself? And where do they come from? Having considered one specific incident, let's now look at that internal self-critic and self-dialogue. And I want you to start monitoring your internal dialogue. And I want every time you hear yourself say, I should do this, I should do that, I must do this, I must do that, I want you to take that pause time and go, stop. We've said it on several of our training sessions. Stop and just consider, I could do this, I could do that. Because that implies choice, it implies that it is a decision, and it implies you have that decision that you are able to make. It takes away the moral imperative. And again, if you hear yourself saying, I should do, I must do, the next question I often frequently ask is, who says? So that's another part to consider. And let's move on now to loving yourself well, showing compassion. Showing compassion for yourself, showing and pampering yourself. Now, I know that we mentioned some of these. I don't know, for those of you that did the 3 C's to loving yourself well. We looked at how to give compassion to ourselves, and we looked at how to give love and care to ourselves. So part and parcel of having forgiven yourself and moving on is then looking after you, taking time out to look after yourself and taking time out to take care of yourself. There are lots of wonderful forgiveness meditations that you can find on YouTube, and I recommend taking time out to just sit down, meditate for the 10 minutes a day and focus on sending out love and forgiveness to the world and receiving it back to yourself. When we looked at forgiving others, we looked at considering their perception and what was happening and why they were behaving in the way that they were at that time. And part of your learning from the feelings of guilt and shame is to look back and to take a step backwards and to look at the you from earlier and consider, was that you? And to consider that that person that you were then was making the best decision that they knew how, that they were operating within a different thought processes to the thought processes that you have now. And even though they may have been doing something that they knew was wrong, there would have been an underlying reason behind it. An example of this might be many teenagers shoplift through pressure from peers. It's one of the things when working as a nursing home manager that for those that got caught and got a caution, it comes up on their criminal record check. And it's one of the things that I often go, there but for the grace of God, because I know of many people when I was at school who used to do it for the thrill. They didn't need anything, they didn't do anything, but it was a case of peer pressure to be part of a group. So the reason for doing something wrong had a higher perception of being accepted. You can think this for people who are being in gangs and the gang culture. So all of us have gone through that identity phase, that socialisation phase from 14 to 21. And it's during this phase that we are likely to do most of the things that we feel guilty about or regret later in life. Whether it be from drug taking to smoking to drinking, it is all these are things that can choose to forgive ourselves for. So I hope that perspective helps. Remember, you were doing what you thought was best. You were doing whatever you did for a reason, whether you were conscious of that reason or not. But it's quite possible for you to reflect on that reason now and to consider your present values and morals and acknowledge just how much you have grown and developed on that. And especially as we become more and more of ourselves, we are less and less likely to do things that are harmful and hurtful to others. Because as I said earlier, as Byron Katie said, only a confused mind would intentionally hurt someone else. That brings us to the end of this unit on forgiveness. Hopefully we've taken the opportunity to complete the exercises and are feeling in a much better place about yourself and about others having completed those processes. Please do get in touch with us and let us know of any of your success stories and how these have improved your life. We look forward to hearing from you, and we look forward to you joining us tomorrow with the final unit of the 60s to Loving Yourself Well, which is on self-love and connection. Look forward to seeing you then.